Hey everyone, and welcome back. My name's Mackenzie, aka Astromac, and I'm a professional astrologer, and I'm here to talk all things astrology with you. Today, I want to talk about Saturn returns and what they are and my own reflections living through my own Saturn return. On May 24th of 2025, we have Saturn leaving the sign of Pisces after transiting there for the last couple of years, and it's ingressing into Aries for the first time in almost 28 years. So to all my Saturn and Pisces friends, congratulations, we have officially survived our Saturn returns, and to all my Saturn and Aries friends, it's really not going to be as bad as what you're probably expecting. So first things first, what is a Saturn return? Essentially, when you're born, Saturn is at a very specific place in the sky. And so that very moment that you're born and you take your first breath and your spirit enters the physical plane, Saturn winds up being in a specific house, in a specific sign, and also making aspects to other planets. So a Saturn return is when Saturn has, circled around and gone through all the other houses and signs throughout your chart and come back around to that very specific point where your Saturn is. That point where it was at the exact time of your birth. And Saturn is a slow-moving planet, so it usually takes about, 28, 29, 30 years to circle all the way back around. So your Saturn return is when Saturn returns to that same area that it was when you were born. And the effects of your Saturn return tend to be felt pretty strong, just because of that age that you're at during that Saturn return. But how it plays out for you really depends on, the house placement and the sign and other aspects that Saturn is making throughout your Saturn return. Like some people have more lax Saturns and other people have more strict Saturns. And maybe I'll make another video someday, but your Saturn return is not your only important Saturn transit. We also have the Saturn square when we're 7 and Saturn opposition when we're about 14, and then another Saturn square when we're 21. And the things that we experience around those ages also kind of play into how your Saturn return is experienced. But that's a whole other conversation. But a lot of times, pretty much no matter where Saturn is sitting in your own chart, Saturn returns tend to be a time of reality checks. Because Saturn is that planet of responsibility and discipline and hard work. And, I know some astrologers call it the Lord of Karma. I'm not a big fan of using that word because I think it's widely misunderstood in this Western world. And it can be really used against people in a very toxic way. But it is that planet of you reap what you sow, and it's that planet of cause and effects. It's also that energy of maturity and self-discipline and taking accountability for your actions and really taking accountability for your life. It's also about boundaries and taking responsibility for yourself and, having some kind of solid foundation and structure in your life that you can build a life from. Like in Pisces, I really feel like it was kind of helping me develop a solid belief in myself throughout my Saturn return. And so sometimes Saturn can bring these harsh life lessons, it feels like, that we learned through hard life experiences. Although I do know a lot of people who had pretty great Saturn returns because they'd already been putting in that hard work and they'd already been disciplined and they'd already been taking responsibility for their life and learning their life lessons and applying that wisdom. And so again, Saturn is you reap what you sow. And so if you've honored those Saturnian things, you're going to breeze right through your Saturn return. But if you've been slacking off or not being responsible and just kind of partying it up and not caring what happens to yourself or other people, then your Saturn return might feel a little more harsh because Saturn's going to come in and say grow the fuck up, basically. Saturn likes to bring us down to reality, and sometimes reality kind of is harsh. So for a lot of people, Saturn returns tend to be this time in their life where it's a turning point, and that's very much how it was for me. It really just brings a profound understanding and awareness of how, you're the one who has to be responsible for your life, and so you're the one who has to, make those necessary changes and start living in a way that is authentic to you and your own journey. So if you find yourself going down a path that doesn't really feel authentic to you throughout your 20s, then it's kind of like Saturn's going to come in and redirect you in a big way. But really the way that I see it is, as we're moving through our Saturn return, it's kind of like we're moving through this gateway and we're graduating and becoming a full mature adult now. We're just growing up. And I remember before my Saturn return just kind of feeling like I'm a teenager pretending to be an adult. And now post Saturn return, it's almost I feel more embodied, and it's Saturn really threw me fully into my body. And like shit just like feels more real now. And like there's no more brushing things under the rug because Saturn will come in and really like shake that rug out. I was actually talking to my friend a couple of months ago about our Saturn returns, and I was saying that, just post Saturn return, it feels more real, and it feels like the universe is saying, like, buckle in, bitch, now shit's getting real. And things do feel more real now. Like, you can't be as careless or thoughtless post Saturn return. It's like everything just has this more, you have to be more responsible now. And it's like I have that awareness of those consequences now. And consequences is a great Saturn word. It's the consequences of your actions, but also the consequences of your inactions. And so I will say that, like, during your Saturn return, there's no hiding from your responsibilities and there's no hiding from taking accountability. It's just kind of like, you got to do what you got to do. So a lot of times during Saturn returns, it brings up, certain situations or life experiences that it might almost feel like we're being tested a little bit. Like for me, I have Saturn in my 10th house, and so there were themes of like authority figures that were really triggering over the course of my Saturn return, and I might get into that a little later. But it's like I was being pushed to step up and be my own authority figure throughout the course of my Saturn return. And that really pertained to like my astrology business, I feel like. And I had to take on a lot more responsibility and discipline in that way, and really like putting in the work. And so I feel like, Saturn returns can be, misunderstood, and they kind of have like this bad reputation because those Saturnian things, they're not like fun, it's like, responsibility, and you have to be disciplined and you have to work hard and all those things. And so sometimes our Saturn returns can feel kind of harsh, and for some people it can feel almost chaotic. But we're really meant to take on these lessons that Saturn's teaching us and integrate them and really, really deeply learn from them and apply it to our lives. And that's what creates wisdom. And it's not like Saturn is like this mean guy in the sky. I tend to actually view Saturn more as like this wise old crone who's had like a lot of different life experiences and is trying to help guide us. And this guidance comes from this space of love and care. Like, for example, it's not healthy to just surround yourself with like yes men who tell you what you want to hear. We need people in our lives who kind of push back and kind of create that resistance to keep us in check and keep us accountable. And that's Saturn. And when you think about it, some of your best friends are probably those people who do keep you accountable. So really try to befriend Saturn throughout your Saturn return. So now I'm going to kind of go into some of my own experiences throughout my own Saturn return. I have officially passed my Saturn return. I'm 30, and so I'm an adult now. And my Saturn sits at 7 degrees of Pisces in my 10th house. And so, right when Saturn ingressed into Pisces, I think it was back in early 2023, I really felt that ingress because I have such an early degree Saturn. But how I would describe it is it was just kind of like this heavier feeling. I wouldn't say that I feel like lighter now that I've passed my Saturn return, but it's almost like I've adjusted to that heaviness and I've become stronger from it. Like if you lift weights, imagine like that first time that you tried to pick up like 50 pounds, probably felt pretty fucking heavy that first time. But then like after you continue to work out and you build strength and you work your way up to that 50 pounds, then that 50 pounds feels a lot lighter, even though it's not. It's just that you have become stronger in that process. And that's kind of what a Saturn return is we're being like weight trained to be able to get stronger, to be able to handle the things that come with being an adult. And like for me, it wasn't like I had this like harsh reality check in one pass. It was kind of like a gradual, slowly taking off those rose tinted glasses and like seeing the world and seeing myself and seeing other people clearly. So like for me, I had this tendency in the past to kind of like put people on pedestals, and it's not that I was doing it on purpose, it's just kind of my natural tendencies to want to see the best in other people. And so I, have this like history of ignoring red flags during my Saturn return. That ignoring of the red flags really came to bite me in the ass. So there were relationships that didn't make it through my Saturn return, but ultimately it was for the best. And really keep in mind that Saturn always has our best interest at heart. I had a mentor who kind of crossed certain boundaries and said hurtful things and did hurtful things to me in the past that, I just kind of brushed under the rug, and, I ignored red flags of things that they said, and I just kind of brushed it off as like me being overly sensitive. But then when I started to witness that treatment happen to, friends around me, that's when I kind of realized like, actually this isn't okay. And that's when I decided to actually acknowledge those red flags and how unethical this person had been in the past, in taking advantage of people and exploiting people. And I really had to learn how to stand up for myself. And, that wasn't easy. But through that process, I really developed firmer boundaries and I learned to never ignore those red fucking flags. And if someone makes you feel less than, time after time, just remember that people treat you exactly how they feel about you. And so through that process, I really had to learn how to be my own authority and be honest with myself and be honest with that person and really remove myself from a toxic environment. And luckily, I had my friends with me who also left that environment. So maybe that'll be a story for another day. But really, through that process, I wound up having to take on more responsibility for my business and being accountable for the role that I played in ignoring those things and in brushing those things under the rug. And that was harsh and it was a really difficult time. And I cried a lot and, I still hurt from it. And so during that time, my career really kind of shifted in a way that it felt like, almost like I was at a crossroads where I could either give up or, I could push harder and work harder. And being an astrologer is not easy. It's not like you just have to know the astrology. It's more of like a polymath type of thing where you have to know lots of different things and understand lots of different things and kind of apply the astrology to that in order to make it real and applicable. And so I wound up, leaning even deeper into, deepening my understanding of those things that I was interested in, as well as deepening my learning of astrology. And, I found new teachers who were more aligned with me and, my perspective on astrology. And throughout that process, I really do feel like it's made me a better astrologer. Even though it was really hard and difficult, and I spent a lot of time feeling really sad and depressed about the situation, just how I'd put so much time and effort into this person who kind of tossed me aside like I was yesterday's takeout. But through this process of, being my own authority and taking on more responsibility for my business, it's, made my job much, much more fulfilling because I put so much more time and love and effort into my business. And it's like, I've created this myself. And so I've really had to kind of develop like a business mindset and, I'm still working on it. Because like I kind of had the opposite of a business mindset where it's like, I want to do this for free, but that doesn't put food on the table. So I'm continuing to work on it, but I do get, much more fulfillment in knowing that I'm helping people who, I brought in myself. But I do also need to pay the bills. And then I was also dealing with, authority figures in my family having kind of like this almost like fall from grace moment. I actually almost lost one of my parents during my Saturn return and, things are still kind of uncertain right now, so I'm not gonna go into too much detail. But Saturn rules time, and so throughout that experience, it really kind of gave me a reality check in how time is limited with your parents. And that's just the reality of things. And we all know on some level that our time with our parents is limited, but I really had to come face to face with that during my Saturn return. And so like dealing with that while also trying to mend a very broken relationship. I've cried a lot this year and it's been hard, but that is life. I think also with this whole reality check thing is I really, really had to learn who I am and what I came here to do. That doesn't mean like I feel like I've found my purpose in life or whatever, because I really feel like our purpose is just to be here and experience life with the people that we love. I really do feel like I got to know myself even deeper through all of the things that I've experienced over the last couple of years. And, like I said, it's made me stronger and it's made me feel like I'm more resilient and just more sure of myself. Another thing that kind of coincided with my Saturn return was almost like in preparation. It's like I made the decision to get sober, at least California sober. But I stopped drinking after, a long time of dealing with substance abuse issues. Getting a little personal here, but I've always been a little bit prone to escapism. And I grew up in a very like toxic, not always the most happy household where I was around substance abuse. So I learned at a young age that like when you're going through tough times to grab a bottle. And so it was actually shortly after I turned 28 that I decided I can't do this to my body anymore and I can't do this to my mental health and I can't do this to these past versions of myself who have tried time and time again trying to get sober. And so I just had enough and now I'm over 2.5 years sober. And so anybody who knows who's gotten sober knows that you really have to come to terms with some things. Like those things that you've put your body through or those things that you've put your family through or your friends. And, it was hard taking a look at, what alcohol had done to me, physically, mentally, emotionally, and what kind of role it played in my life. And having to take responsibility for those things and being accountable and dealing with the ramifications of those things. And so during that time, it's kind of like I really went through this, new level of a dark night of the soul. And so through that dark night of the soul, I really got to know myself even deeper. And, that spiritual connection that I have with myself, I always think Asanabe, anybody who knows him, he talks about, the alcohol spirit. That was really the piece that had been missing all those times I tried to get sober before, was that spiritual element. But so through that process, it was a reality check and having to take responsibility and accountability for those things. And even though it wasn't fun, it was just something I had to do, and it was a part of me growing the fuck up. I also think that, a large part of my Saturn return being in such a visible house, is kind of releasing that fear of what other people think about me. Like, I definitely still care in a way, how I'm being perceived. I am a 5th house Libra sun. But it's like to a much lesser extent after my Saturn return. I think I also released like caring about other people's expectations of me. It's kind of like, fuck your expectations. I really learned this idea of how like everybody is a mirror and a lot more people are projecting than they even realize. And so I was very observant in, watching the people around me and how they treated me, and especially how they would treat me after I would have to set a boundary. Because how people react to those things really tells me what I need to know about them as a person. So I really learned to not personalize things as much throughout my Saturn return. Like, everybody's just kind of trying their best out there. So, keep your eyes on your own paper and just do you. And don't compare your life journey to anybody else's, because nobody has gone through everything that you've gone through. And with Saturn being in Pisces, I really feel like I was learning lessons in compassion and vulnerability. And like not jumping on the defense, but rather choosing to open myself up more. I've come to realize that, my ability to be vulnerable really is one of my greatest strengths. And so here I am being vulnerable in this video. And as I'm sitting here kind of reflecting back, I did go through my fair share of existential crises. I had like 3 passes of Saturn going over my natal Saturn because of, Saturn's retrograde cycle. And that first pass was really rough. And I did go through a period of feeling depressed. But, I've been dealing with depression since I was about 12 years old. So I've learned by now that, I just I go through these waves where it sucks me under a little bit deeper. And then I go through other times where I'm like floating on top of the water. And so that first pass was definitely a time where it pulled me under a little bit deeper. Because Saturn, again, brings those reality checks. And, sometimes reality fucking sucks. But eventually you learn to swim and you push yourself back up to that surface and, using the more tools that you have. And so throughout my Saturn return, it felt like I was kind of filling up my toolbox more and more with those things that I know that help me get through those difficult times and that help me when I'm struggling to deal with reality. Throughout my Saturn return, I also had like my fair share of spiritual experiences. It's like spirituality became more real to me during this time. And I started to dive more into tarot and mediumship. And that really helped me in deepening my own spiritual beliefs. I also feel like throughout this time, I really came to a greater sense of self-acceptance. That doesn't mean that I'm always like fully accepting of all parts of myself, but I do, love and accept myself on a much deeper level. And it's not like it's as fleeting as it was before. And just because I've passed my Saturn return doesn't mean that I've like figured it all out now. I'm still very much in that process of figuring out like what I should do now and where I should go from here. So even though I have survived my Saturn return, again, it's not like I've got it all figured out now, because parts of my life really did kind of crumble down and fall apart. I don't know that I would attribute it to my Saturn return. I had a lot of other kind of difficult transits that I was going through throughout my Saturn return. But if you also experience kind of parts of your life crumbling down and kind of falling apart, just keep in mind that when things fall apart, it gives you the opportunity to put things together how you want it to be. Like, you get to put things together in a new and improved way with sturdier, more solid foundations. My advice to people coming up on their Saturn return, whether you have Saturn in Aries or Saturn in Taurus, is to not resist those lessons that Saturn is trying to teach you. Because sometimes, especially with Saturn in Aries, it might come in like a sledgehammer. I'm hoping none of you have difficult Saturn returns though, and you get to reap the rewards of, that hard work and discipline and responsibility that you've already put in. Also keep in mind that nobody is immune to a Saturn return. It's a transit that everybody goes through if they live to be 30, and just kind of expect for, reality checks to happen, because those reality checks come no matter how much hard work you've put in. Also give yourself some time and space to reflect on like why you might be learning these Saturnian lessons. Also understand that you will get through it. Even though it might feel really difficult in the moment, you are kind of becoming stronger and more resilient through this time. Also keep in mind that this was just my own Saturn return experience, and so this is by no means like a complete list of things you could go through. Everybody's Saturn return experience is their own unique experience. And you know, I could also have included like the 150 other things that I went through during my Saturn return, but we'd be here for 3 days straight. So to anybody who's watching who has passed their Saturn return, maybe leave a comment down below, you know, like what experiences you had, and if you have any advice for people who are coming up on their Saturn return. And actually, I just remembered that about a year ago, I was on my friend Casey's astrology podcast, and they were asking me about like my Saturn return experience, and that was actually before I had experienced a lot of what I attribute to my Saturn return. But we went into depth about, you know, like what a Saturn return is and what I was expecting from mine. And so I'll link that down below. And like, just so you know, it's not like I'm the Saturn return expert. There's a lot of things that I probably could have done differently that would have led to a much smoother and easier Saturn return. But yeah, you know, I hope this was helpful in some way. And let me know what you guys think. And if you want to learn more things astrology, then be sure to like and subscribe, as it would really help me out and helping to build my business. And yeah, so I think that's all I've got for now. So I'm gonna love you and leave ya. So love you, bye!